Hi there, it's the Needlepoint Finishing Fairy. Today we are finishing a needlepoint star. If you're new here, welcome in. I'm a needlepointer and a professional direct-to-consumer finisher. I make content that helps you troubleshoot, try new things, and expand your self-finishing abilities. Finishing a needlepoint star is a great next step after you've mastered rectangles and squares. With a rectangle and a square, you've mastered the right angle exterior cuts. With a star, you'll master interior cuts and tricky acute angles of the star points. I gave this finish 2 out of 5 stars because the inside corners and outside corners can be tricky, but it's a really good shape to master because once you do this, you'll have the tools to do pretty much any other special shape. So let's go ahead and hop in and get started. Let's talk about finishing hearts and stars. Hearts and stars are great projects to do after you do a rectangle or a square finish. Because for a couple reasons. One, they're pretty common shapes. I finish a lot of these. Two, the canvases that are hearts and stars are fairly affordable. So if you're really looking to get into this and want an affordable canvas to stitch to practice on, hearts and stars are the way to go. And then thirdly, I think we're on number 3 of reasons. The reason why these are good for after a square or rectangle is because with a square rectangle, you've mastered, the outside corner, how to handle the outside corners. Now with hearts and stars, you're handling an inside corner as well as really narrow outside corners. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the things that I'm considering releasing, and let me know if you guys are interested in this, is kind of like a PDF of how to cut these. I got some really good feedback when I did my cake video about maybe showing people like a guide of where to cut. So then that way you're not like accidentally cutting somewhere that is going to bite you in the butt later. So let's go ahead and get started, and let me know if you think one of those guides would be helpful. So when you're cutting these, the objective on the inside corners is to leave as much canvas on either side as possible. So like here, you don't want to cut like this because then you're going to be in trouble here. You don't want to cut like this because then you're going to be in trouble there. So you want to go essentially totally perpendicular to where the shape is, where the point is. Now that might not be perfectly straight, but you just want to go perpendicular to the stitching. And with these types of canvases, you can see that the outside border that I've left is pretty generous. It's about a 1/2 inch. You could leave a little bit more if you want. I wouldn't go any smaller than that because you want these tabs to have enough structural integrity to bend and pull back behind the canvas itself. So don't be too stingy. Okay, so this one I'm going to angle in right here. Okay, we have one more to go. Now I'm thinking about this one because there's like a line at the bottom. So actually I'm going to cut here, and I'm going to cut in here. So I made like a little V. I don't know if you guys can see that. I hope you can. Okay. All right, so now that I'm done with my inside cuts, let's do the outside cuts. So one of the things that I really like to do on these, as well as on rectangles, is cut like kind of like a tab here on these corners, and this will fold up under. You can't go too wide. You can't go any wider than the width here, if that makes sense, because you're essentially going to fold it underneath, so it can't be any wider than that, otherwise it will show. So let's just do this here. And again, you can trim these down in a little bit. It's not the end of the world. Okay. So now we got those cut. The last thing that I'll do is I'll just cut into here to remove some of this bulk, as well as ensure that that canvas tab does not show when we fold it over. So like obviously this would show, so let's just trim that a little bit more. Okay. Now let's cut right here. Just doing a little bit of snippies. Okay. funny, the things that I say on these videos, you can tell that I have little kids because the way that I talk sometimes is like, oh yeah, she's a toddler. Bear with me. Okay. So here we go. And I mean, it's, as long as you're not cutting the canvas, pretty much everything is fixable. The other thing that I'll mention too as I'm doing this is, I don't do this on canvases really, but you can. I would do this on a 3D canvas for sure, because you're gonna be working with the material a lot longer. But you can do a little zigzag stitch on your machine all the way around the edge. So you can zigzag stitch like right in here, right along the stitching essentially, without touching the stitching. Do a little zigzag stitch, and that will keep the integrity of your canvas pretty strong, which could always be helpful to you. Here I'm just going to remove a little bit of bulk. I'm not getting into that corner really, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. Just going to try to take a little bit of bulk out without making these tabs too small, because again, you're trying to balance removing bulk versus structural integrity of your tabs. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to do one more snip here just to balance that out. So that's how I cut this star. The next step in the process is to use a light board or light box or a bright window to cut out a template for trimming your mat board that will go inside of your ornament. So I just use a window in my home. Other methods include using a Cricut or taking a photocopy, but I find that this is fastest for me. All right, once we have traced the special shape, it's time to cut them out. So I'm kind of doing these in batches. I've already done the heart, but I'll show you the star for this example. So again, kind of where we're picking up, I just traced this on a light box, AKA my window.
Sentence how you could put it?
Yep, like use it in a sentence. Okay, I'll just show you this. When I'm cutting out, usually I cut within like 2 stitches equivalent as I'm cutting that out. I just eyeball it. I would just need a little bit more trimming. So when you do special shapes like this, you really want to make sure that the inside corners are trimmed really. So now what we'll do is we'll go over to our mat board and cut our mat board out using our template. So now I'm just using clips to secure the mat board to the fabric here. I didn't record actually lacing this, but you'll get the idea when I show you how to lace using the canvas. So here you can see I have my canvas, I have my batting, which I've cut slightly smaller than even the mat board itself, and then I have the mat board piece. Really quickly, I want to show you how tight I cut those corners. They're pretty aggressively clipped in the corners there and allowed myself a lot of extra room on those inner corners. So using your DMC floss, you can go ahead and start lacing. For this piece, I started lacing the sides of the star and left the tops of the stars unlaced until the very end step. Because you've cut these somewhat on the bias, like you've cut through the canvas intersections on a diagonal, they're going to be really weak and flimsy. So you don't want to add a lot of tension when you're lacing a special shape like a star, because if you think about it, the canvas only has the intersections on the canvas itself to adhere. So it's really important that you don't over tighten and over stretch the canvas, because you'll rip right through all of those different canvas intersections and somewhat have a mess on your hands. So I'm going slow, and I'm not putting a ton of tension on the tabs as I'm working. You can certainly add a clip as you go along to make it a little easier on yourself, which is what I've done here. So when you're working with any canvas, you kind of aim to lace across the piece to create a good amount of diagonal tension. So you just kind of follow the way, honestly, the way that the string wants to go. You just kind of point it away from where you're at and kind of lace across the piece. Here I want to show you, I kind of slowed this part down. This tab is too big, so you can just go in there with some nippers and clip that right off. You'll remember that I tried to get most of that when I started. So now I'm almost done with all of the sides of the stars, and pretty soon I'll begin to lace the tops of the stars. So just, you know, when you're working with this, fold over the tabs, try to get as much canvas on the back as possible. The objective here is that the stitches kiss the table. So you're looking for the canvas to start to wrap around the back, just slightly, without having stitching on the back of your piece. So I know that this is a lot like watching paint dry, but I did include all of the lacing in this video to kind of show you how you can work the tabs around the back, and somewhat how gentle I'm being with lacing this, because it's easy to split your canvas. Okay, here I'm going into the tip of one of the stars, so you'll see me grab that tip, pull it through. I'm really not pulling that hard. I'm just kind of trying to wrap it around the back without pulling too much tension on the canvas. So here's another tab. I'm going through the front, through the back, out the front, snipping any excess canvas that I need to, that would show. Cutting these tabs down. I'm even cutting the end tab down a little bit. Okay, now I'm ready to pull it through. Again, I'm just barely folding it over. I'm not putting that much tension on it. And now we'll grab the last tab. Sorry, that's a little off camera. I'm learning how to be a good videographer. So I'm giving it a little check. Now we have this little tab here I'll grab. That's the bottom of the ornament that you mentioned, that you might remember that I cut two little parts into, kind of like a V. During this section I'm going through and I'm pulling, you know, kind of some sections that need to be a little bit tighter. So I'm going through and just kind of double lacing in some areas. Now I am knotting off. Snip that off. Give it a little squeeze. Work that canvas over the edges a little bit more. And I'm pretty happy with how this looks after this step of the process. When we go back in with the cording, we're going to be able to tighten that down in some areas as well. But now we have the back and the front, and we're ready for the next step, which is applying the cording. Okay, so now we're going to do the star. So I started by pinning it on the top I just used a couple pins so this doesn't unravel. And now I'm going to work my way around the side, and then we're going to do the loop at the top. One thing I'll mention kind of as we go through is, you know, some of this canvas is showing on this end, and there's things that you can do kind of as you're working with your piece to make sure that these little pieces of canvas are hidden. So let's get started. So as I'm going around, I'm just kind of like twisting the cording. And I'm gonna put this on here, make sure it's all lined up, tuck my tail ends in. So I like to pin it all to the canvas side, and then I use the back to just make sure it has a nice snug fit and appearance. So let's go ahead and clip that on there. So now as you work your way around the edge, the cording actually doesn't hide that much showing canvas, so it's just important. This is your check before you start sewing everything together to make sure that like the canvas is not going to show. So I'm just going through, I'm sinking pins, you know, approximately at the top and then also in the inner corners. So I'll just pause here. When I was doing this corner, I noticed that this part of the canvas is showing. So there's a couple things you can do. I like to start with just working with my hands, but as I'm going through, I just kind of fold that part over, and you can kind of finger press it behind there to make sure none of that shows. Just fold in those little edges. Just might need a few more pins in here. Okay, there we go. Sink one right in here. Okay, this is the edge that I wanted to show you guys. So you can see there's some canvas showing on that side. I'm gonna try to work it around with my fingers. I'm gonna use a couple little tools to try to get that canvas to kind of turn under itself so it doesn't show. I definitely could have laced this part a little tighter. However, when you're doing special shapes, I really think that you gotta be careful about how tight you lace it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and finger press that under a little bit so the canvas is not showing. That looks pretty good. The second thing you can do is do some pre-stitching before you sew the cording on, and that will zip everything together, and that really does hide a lot of canvas on the edges. And then the third thing that, you know, is kind of a last resort is you should take apart your piece and then trim your matboard down. It's better to do that before you sew your cording on. Otherwise you're going to result in a lot of frustration at the end. Cording doesn't magically hide canvas showing. It's more of a decorative transition from the front to the back of your needlepoint piece. Now I say it doesn't hide it. It will hide, you know, like half a row or something like that. And so you'll get better at kind of judging how much you can kind of get away with. Here's where you want to kind of follow the direction of the cording to make your loop. It's going to want to twist a certain way. So here you can see that I'm just trying to figure out which way it wants to twist. Now that I have that part done, you can see that the cording kind of follows up the side of the star and enters the twist at the loop at the top, and I think it looks really nice. I'm really pleased with how that turned out. Now we're ready to sew on the cording. Just kind of work your way around, and then we'll come back when we do the top loop. So again, you can see I'm cutting. I have this knotted on the back, and then I'm following the direction of the cording to dictate where my needle comes in and comes out. I'm not lacing it this way. I'm lacing it into the twist of the cording, coming out between the colors, and plunging on the front of my canvas. This is not super tight on the side yet, but I will come back and stitch this tighter once I have the top done. Okay, quick tip when you get to these inner corners, you're gonna wanna let the cording kind of dictate where you plunge in and plunge out, but I really try to make it so it lines up with like the inner corner here. Now that I've worked my way around and sewn it all together, you can see that there's a little bit of canvas showing here. So I'm just taking a little plastic tool and shoving that canvas in the gap. It doesn't work all the time. It only works if you have a teensy tiny bit of canvas showing, but it is another final check for how that looks. You can go back and sew with a little bit of invisible thread to further tighten up between the front and the back of your canvas if you're still want a little bit more of that canvas hidden underneath the twist of the cording. That's it. All in all, I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I think it is a great compliment to the heart that I also finished, and the stitching was simply beautiful. I hope you enjoyed following along with this tutorial.